because poverty and inequality are so deeply linked. There is no political equality if there's not economic equality, and times are tough. It seems like the poor are getting the shitty end of the stick more and more all the time under this austerity regime, so fighting it's really a deep interest of mine, and I think for a lot of other people. And so we got three really good guests who are part of the fight today. I think we'll start with Kevin. He's an injured worker advocate. And maybe you could just tell us a little bit about your circumstances.
Yeah, basically, been an injured worker since '99, September, and I really didn't speak out at all, not even for my own benefit, to do with my claim, because I didn't know and I was scared. So a lot of injured workers like that, you know, they go on Facebook for support, but they won't speak out, and they won't kind of use their real names even, actually, because they're scared of being cut off, and I know what that's like. I've kind of kept going with it though, so I'm not scared of them, and I'm showing people we need to stand up and speak out, you know. And so the last, I would say the summer prior to Occupy, I really started to get into activism, a little more protester, I would say. And once Occupy kicked in, I kind of got inspired big time, obviously, Occupy WSIB, kind of a mindset of we got to get the info out there. And it's not just protesting, but any kind of direct action. Get out there for the people that can, you know. Like, and I do it as cheap and poor as I can, you know. I upload raw video. I don't edit because people need to know it's easy, you know. People do it with their phones, you know. Take a picture. If you see a protest and you support that protest, take a picture, post it.
Maybe you can talk a bit about WSIB, you know, where their funding comes from in that,
yep.
And how they treat you.
Yep. Basically, a lot of people don't realize this, but WSIB, Workplace Safety Insurance Board, is the old Workers' Compensation Board. They changed it in '97. And now what it is basically it's funded entirely by the employers, not by yourself, the worker. So it's insurance on you. The WSIB actually every year is giving back anywhere from $38 to $43 million in rebates back to the employers that actually fund the system, right? That's benefit money for workers. So it's leading to basically austerity measures on the lower people like myself, the long-term claims. You know, they still have me working 20 hours a week, and I haven't worked in 6 years. Fighting them is impossible because you're excluded from insured health services in the Canada Health Act. So anything to do with my injury has to be billed to WSIB rather than to OHIP. And because they just deny stuff because it's cheaper, right? Because a long-term claim, I hurt myself at 28, and by their words, I'm permanently disabled. I'm never going to get better, so nothing's going to fix me. So they don't pay for nothing. So it's really cruel, right? They don't care about quality of life. The fact that maybe I can't work, but I'd like to be able to eat and sleep and have a social life, you know. Events like this kill me to come out. I need to come out though because I don't get to the regular meetings because it's too hard for me to, you know, sit. But, you know, to get out here and tell the story, and, you know, I don't make it about myself. It's what happens when people that you know get hurt, and you all of a sudden, maybe you don't even notice, but you stop seeing them as much. And, you know, they don't go to bars, and it's because, you know, we don't feel good. We don't get the coverage. I don't even get painkillers or any kind of meds. And I've been dealing with this for 16 years. And they don't even dispute my pain levels. But because they have medical consultants, they make decisions that override the healthcare profession. And it's ridiculous, you know, because that's why injured workers don't fight, because most of us are in too much pain. And with the threat of being cut off benefits, we're already in poverty, right? What else can you do? And unfortunately, somebody like myself, I got nothing to lose. I don't even fight my own case anymore, you know. I'm still in that, I've objected, but I'm burned out. I can't fight it. I can't afford a lawyer. And the Office of the Worker Advisor is actually funded by WSIB. Same with the Office of the Employer. So it's kind of like you're overwhelmed with appeals. So I can't even get a worker in my own town of London, which is big. I have to get one from Windsor. And, you know, we fought, and we actually went to the tribunal level, and I won. I got the disc of the recording, and they agreed 100% that I don't work, I can't work. WSIB was supposed to send me to a doctor for a reassessment. Well, they don't do that anymore. So how am I haven't been assessed in 10 years. And the tribunal all agreed that I'm twice as bad as I was 10 years ago. And, you know, it's hard to fight a system when, really, how do you fight the system? I don't believe even politically that it's gonna change in my benefit, right? Like everybody always says, you know, vote NDP, you know, they're there for us. Are they? You know, the odd time we get them to speak at an event for us, but where are they actually on this? You know, with any politician, I don't want to say just the one, right? But it's like that one speaks up in Queen's Park about it at what, election time or political time, like, because then it goes silent after that, right? Like, so it's very frustrating trying to build. You know, I go to all sorts of events because I connected myself to corporate greed, capitalism, poverty, all these different things apply to, you know, don't fight for the injured worker then, fight against the fact that there's 350 employees there on the sunshine list. You know, it keeps going up, right? That's benefit money that goes to injured workers. About 60% of injured workers now are being forced onto ODSP. Well, that's now a taxpayer-funded system, which also takes away from people I actually know that need ODSP, who tell me that the process is denied right away. So then they have to appeal. Well, I'm not on it myself, I actually had to go on it years ago for a very brief period. But it's like, I shouldn't technically be on it because I'm on WSIB, right? So they made the exception for me. And yet people that need it, you know, same with healthcare. Because we're excluded, a lot of times it does get pushed on to the taxpayer because OCAP does cover certain things. Say by mistake, has to fight to try to get coverage or, I don't know, I tend to ramble on, so if there's really, it's tough though, right? Because even the president of WSIB, he made more in taxable benefits alone than I made last year. And I'm on the higher end of scale for injured workers. There's people living off $300 a month. That's why I fight so hard is sure, I'm poor most of the time, all the time, but the little bit that I do eat, I have energy, I got more than enough energy. It's physical motivation I can't always get out, right? And that's kind of tough, right? Because you don't want to ask people all the time for a ride, you know, like, but when I can drag myself out, this year was bad because of weather, but there wasn't much protesting. Protests I go out to, and it hurts me, and I do it, pay for it 3 or 4 days, but I have to do it because I'm passionate about C51, right? Like some of my friends actually that know me on Facebook, I made a comment about how maybe I should just go on a hunger strike because how would it be any different than I'm living now? And then I put hashtag FWSIB. Well, the settings were set to friends only. But yet the London Police Officer Barbara, who happened to be the one in the video from the week before who was hassling me at my protest, happens to call it mental health concerns, that they figured that I was going to harm myself, that they actually had a mental health crisis team on standby, that they could be at my house in moments. But that's kind of why I see 51, right? Like, see, being an injured worker, I think lack of sleep, I get emotional. That issue, if bugs me because, they can use something like that to put a file mark against me. It made me seem, they can't make me seem aggressive, right? I'm not violent. But now they can label me through the phone calls. They left messages, right? Now I know they're probably recording it. But they can do that with anybody. Like, why are the London police watching my Facebook? And I know the officer that's doing it is one of the ones that hassles a lot of us. So I know why he's doing it. But what value is it to taxpayers for that to happen? It can happen to any of our friends or family over, everybody hates Mondays. I see that meme all the time. Is people gonna get, oh, they're depressed because it's Monday, better, watch them. Like, I don't know if anybody knows, recently in Newfoundland, there was an injured worker, advocate, very well outspoken like myself, a 59-year-old Don Dunphy, gunned down in his house. And the only reports we're hearing, the officer's name has still not been released. He was plain clothes and went to his house on Easter Sunday to about perceived threats on Twitter made against the Premier and I guess what they call MHAs or whatever, I guess members of Parliament. Well, there was no, if you read the full context of the Twitter, there was no threats made at all. And even the news is running the wrong story. They're running this snippet. And there's all these people come out, they had a big vigil at his house. There's all these people saying, he's not a violent person. He was outspoken. And that could happen to any of us, right? Like, we stand up for all sorts of issues. And the fact is, they're just trying to silence us through local police. WSIB even, I got video of them following me for 3.5 hours. At protests, actually, where some of our friends are at. Zooming in on their license plates. That's not my vehicle. Why are they zooming in on that license plate? Like, there's just too much information that's being stolen and scaring people away from speaking out. I'm kind of rambling a bit.
No,
that issue gets me really upset though, just the fact that at my home, in public, I don't care. I'll push the line. Actually, I'm usually one of the first ones on the street. But in my home, when I'm getting, like on Easter Saturday, I got 3 phone calls, all at meal times, 9, noon, and 5, and 1 message actually. And it's just very stressful because the wording is just trying to make it that, we're concerned, and they need me to call them back. Well, after the Million Mass March, so since I've moved, I've had pretty much non-stop, without a little gap of non-stop police harassment. The Million Mass March is a pretty good video of an officer who came across pretty aggressive. I just happened to catch some of the moments, whatever. Well, the video kind of went viral, and the London police hassled me like 20 times. I got unknown calls after I moved, and it was stressful, I kind of dealt with it. Like, out in public's one thing, but at my house, it's very stressful, Like, again, what for? It wasn't a crime, but they wanted the video because they wanted to identify people that were there. They kept coming up with, the investigations took a twist is one of the messages. There's just anything they could to get this video, threatening basically to go to other measures, which they didn't specify, but that made me think, okay, are they going to show up in my house? Like, it was just stressful. Over what? It's not even a video of a crime or anything. It was it's on YouTube actually, so.
Good. You got a couple of injured workers day coming up, day of mourning. And
Yep, day of April 28th actually, down at Tall Puddle is where the monument is outside, and they hold an event there every year usually. That's Labor Council, I do believe, yep. And it starts at 10 a.m. So come on down if you want to show your support for workers that have been injured, made ill, through asbestos or cancers, or killed on the job actually. Every year in Canada, 1,000 workers die. And that's another frustrating thing too, is there's a law in place to actually punish people that are found guilty of causing the death. and yet that law has never been used, right? Like, it's a criminal code law. Instead, companies get, like last year, there was a report just came out, WSIB gave back $15 million in benefit money to employers who are actually found guilty of causing the worker's death. So not only is the 43 million rebates pretty bad, hospitals are bad for it too, you know, getting lack of care. And also, actually, June 1st, we're holding an event at Deb Matthews' office. She's the deputy premier, but she's also the minister in charge of poverty reduction plan. So what better way to try to get our message out about injured workers than taking it to her office. Some of us can't make it to Toronto for the big event. They hold that at Queen's Park every year. But it's like the 32nd year, I do believe, Injured Workers Day. So come out and join us at Deb Matthews. We're starting at 11 a.m. June 1st. Yeah. I think it's a
Monday.
Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday?
Monday.
Okay. Yep. Oh, actually, we do have a protest next Friday also at WSIB, starting at 4:30, and that's being organized by the anarchist Black Flag Anarchist Free School. So.
Where is WSIB?
It's 148 Fullerton Street. Basically, we'll be at the corner of Fullerton and Richmond. The Talbot area. Basically, their offices are in the middle of the building there, kind of, where they come down out of the elevators. So we kind of hold the same.
Are they on the ground floor?
They're upstairs, actually. So, and that's what stops a lot of injured workers from coming out, because WSIB's actually sent letters out banning them from the property, banning them from even talking, because they snoop on our Facebook groups, actually. Windsor, there was a court case going on about the same thing. They're taking a member from my group, Mike Spencer, to try to get a peace bond against them. And 6 of the high-ups, including the WSIB chief of security, was worried something was going to happen to him in front of his family, or that he wasn't going to get home from work, right? And it's funny because they just look bad for trying to do it. It's actually a criminal court, but peace bond.
That's the level of discontent with injured workers in Ontario now. Just in the short time I've worked with Kevin, the group I've come across are seething.
Yeah.
They're just, they're not being dealt with in a good way at all. And no one knows about it.
There's one guy right now that we blanked out his name and some of the personal identifying info. He's in appeal, so he's actually not even getting money from WSIB. He's living off nothing right now. And they fight the appeal sometimes 4 to 5 years. I know, I went through it. He's under threat right now. They have the power apparently to guarantee wages, seize your, like, put liens on stuff, seize your assets. Like, he's $36,000, they say, on what? You deny a claim, you're not even paying him. You know, he's under threat, he's married with a kid, he's suicidal, he's talking. I think his kid is keeping him alive, I think. And I've heard that a lot of times. His daughter actually, we were in Windsor, we had a girl with us at 17, and her mother actually didn't commit suicide with WSIB because of stress. They say is when we take care of it, we're in poverty and stress, and it's how you deal with it, I guess. I don't know, I went through all the anger sports and the drinking, and, you know, I haven't drank in only 6 years, because I truthfully don't feel like it. I'm sore, and drinking's a fun thing, and some people use it to vent. Doesn't work for me. It just makes me more frustrated, right? And you can't do nothing about it, so. But, you know, injured workers do all sorts of, you know, they lose their family, houses, cars, whatever, like,
I've worked in an injury clinic for chronic pain for 15 years. The massage therapists in our clinic refused to take WSIB because they would work on with somebody for a couple of years, and then at the end of that couple of years, the WSIB would say, this person is taking it.
Yeah.
And they want all the money back. This is how you end up with them saying that they owe $26,000. Some people who are on injured require therapy, and the therapy sometimes costs them $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
And so what's going on is that the entire insurance industry, not just the WSIB, but the entire insurance industry is set up with the idea that they will challenge every case that they can. Any head injuries, absolutely they challenge, and any back injuries, absolutely challenge. Because the variability in a back injury is huge. It can be a person can get hit in the back of a truck and walk away fine, or they can be crippled for the rest of their life. So it's so variable, they use that against the worker.
Yeah.
And so they have a schedule, and they actually call it that. By this date, you should have seen these many people, and you've done this much, this is your treatment plan, and you should be to this point. And they expect that the person is going to get to that point, as if they're a machine or something.
Yeah.
And everybody's treated the same.
Well, they're supposed to be treated the same, yes.
I mean, the same standard is set for all.
Yeah, and they're treated as if they're the same when they're not the same. And so, anyways, it's the starting premise of the insurance industry as a business model that overrides the insurance industry as a health provider. Yes. So those two come at, they're at odds with each other. So, for example, they know that if they are slow enough about providing the cash for the person to get services, the person will have to find ways of getting services on their own.
Yeah.
And once they started to have services on their own, the insurance industry will say, well, you're doing it, so why do we need to do it?
Yeah.
And so then you have to fight them for that, and then finally they'll let you get in. But then each step as you go along, they figure that there will be, let's say you start out with 100 people, okay, 15 of them are going to get dumped in the first step, another 15 the next step, and there's 10 steps, so by the end, you end up with like 3 people left that actually get the full benefit of the entire system. So that's their plan.
And the longer term claims, like myself, are the ones I find are the one after, right? Like the number of people that are using it, like long-term claims, is low. It's like 20-something%.
The number of people that use the system, period, is 4%.
Yeah, and and most of them are the ones that are taking it because they want the weekend off, so they have their finger, like I knew people like that. I've seen guys in the factory get 2 days off, and they don't even have to get any money from WSIB because the company has to pay them for the day off, right? But they technically file a claim. Those are the small ones they don't seem to go after. And like I said, the number's so small anyways. The amount of employers that are actually built in the system, hiding injuries and rebates or is crazy.
That's true.
Yeah.
But and the number of employers that have used their in the 15 years that I worked in this, we had 3 people that were cheated. That entire time, and we're talking about hundreds and hundreds of people. The number of cases where the employer was doing something against the person is like 30%. Where they're getting them to work in unsafe situations, where they're getting them to work in situations where their tiredness becomes a factor and they can get injured, all these kinds of things. Anyways, when I was working for them, the WSIB called up all the massage therapists in the province of Ontario asking them to help, and they were turned down all except for about 7 or 8 people in the province. So we're talking about several thousand people all saying, go away. So
and they have their people that they provide out to, right? There's certain ones that they do, and it's so funny that they get away with that, right? Like some of them, even the schools they sent us to, were coming out that they weren't even accredited, right? Like, how does that work? You're spending so much money. Cascade Disability, 15 grand for services provided to me, but my college program was only gonna be about $9,000. Wow, and considering they scrapped the program and sent me back to work, how did they get 15 grand for what services did they provide, right? Like, that seems ridiculous that they're spending that much money to just basically make it look like there's no lost time injury. Like, if they can get a worker back to work, even if to literally just walk around the floor for 8 hours doing nothing, then they can say they got him back to work. Even if he can't do it, if he does it for 6 hours, then they just pay the difference, right? Like, but then they can say they got him back to work, and it's ridiculous. You know, a lot of people actually get their therapy cut off, or people that continue to get therapy. I know some of them actually complain about it, how much they're going against the restrictions almost to do some of the stuff. But, I know of the injury I have, doing certain things, I can't do it. It hurts. It causes way more pain than it's ever worth.
Good.
Yeah, well.
Back, maybe Bob. It's Bob Sexsmith. He's a Unifor retiree and does some poverty work locally. Maybe you could start off telling us a little bit about what you're involved in and your circumstances.
They keep telling me I talk too much. Basically, I have been doing advocacy in one form or another since about 1965, and I'm too dumb to retire, so I keep going. I made a hobby out of irritating the comfortable wherever possible, and quite often they invite me to a public meeting or something, and they will even give me coffee to show up, so I follow that along. One of the things I can remember with John, John started a health center just down the street here a long time ago, George, as I remember it. But we had also started the Unemployed Health Center, which is still going, the London Unemployed Health Center on Dundas Street and Rideout. And they had, I missed it, but they had the 25th anniversary of that thing, and I was supposed to get a certificate, which I never got. But anyways, I didn't show up at their anniversary dinner, but it was 3 times we had to fight to set up an unemployed health center. And this is back in the 70s. And we used to do unemployment, OW appeals, and WSIB appeals. And we were constantly, I was using at that time volunteers from the labor movement who worked on EI problems, and they may have been an EI appeals adjudicator, because labor used to get to appoint some of these for the appeals on EI. We had the same thing going with compensation, where a union guy would be working on compensation cases in his own plant. He would volunteer at the health center, and we would work on filing appeals and everything. This was even before they started the worker representatives that they have downtown, who, I don't know what the hell they do now, but anyways, in our day, we did all the paperwork. We took the worker and made sure that they got all the forms filled out. And it was the same thing with unemployment, it was the same thing with comp, it was the same thing with welfare. Mostly those people who were living without, because of an economic circumstance, we were trying to provide them with a means to access the center and trying to help by representing them when necessary, by getting them to fill out the right papers. I also, about 1967, 69, I was on a committee that came out of the labor movement to build London's first continuing housing co-op. Because as a worker, and John will know, because he was my neighbor on Margaret Street just over here, and I was living on Francis Street back in 72, I believe it would be, about 43 years ago or more, around in there someplace. Dates kind of disappeared because I quit having birthdays 25 years ago, so I didn't have to celebrate them. But what we were going through as working men at the time, because John was at Westinghouse, I think it was then, and he came on through the UE and he came up on the Labor Council where I was, and we and a few others decided that there were some things that we could do for working people. And I guess my basic philosophy is that I read Walter Reuther's statement that representation of the membership did not end at the plant gate. It extends into the community. So I've been on the community side of representing workers who don't even know that I exist. But they find my phone number or my email, and I get those messages about what do I do next. And sometimes I can help, but sometimes I can't. I've served on the first provincial board called ACTO, Advocacy Center of Ontario, for tenant rights. I've served on the City Hall, on the Housing Advisory Committee, the Housing Advisory Environment. I've been on 10 years now, I've been on London Housing's Board of Directors. And I've constantly had to advocate for workers and workers' rights, because I don't make a distinction between someone who is on poverty, somebody who works for somebody else, or somebody that's in a union. We are all workers first. And I gotta fight for the dignity of being alive and being a human being. And I have spent a lot of time on I don't know how many picket lines, except that January of this year I got sick, and I don't know what it was, but it put me down for a week and a half, and every time I tried to go up to a picket line to save Canada Post and all these other things that need to be addressed, I'd get sick and end up laying down again for 2 days, so I quit going out to those demos. Now the weather's changing. My wife is saying, now you got someplace to go. Because my wife has put up with me way too long, 57 years from this past January, and that's a long time to endure my presence, which are few and far between, but I do go out a lot, so that makes her happy. Right now, I've been working on poverty issues and housing issues. I was able to get, as part of a lead, I guess you'd call it, I don't call myself a leader. There are too many leaders that want to build a resume and want to do the public speaking and all the rest of it. I let them go, but I'm always one that tries to be in the crowd, standing with workers or those that need that support in that way, because that's what I am, and I can't change. I've got myself under control because I got my tank here with me, but sitting in front of people, I would much rather be on the floor. And they've said, I don't know how to ask a question, I make a statement. And I just keep going that way, because if you give them a question, they can say yes, no, or don't bother me, and that's the end of it. But if you make a statement, you can make the point that you're trying to get heard. Because, and I'm going to go on to this little one-pager I got here. I tried to figure out, and I must say I tried about 4 different pages, and I kept not wanting to say that, so I ended up with one. But poverty is not new, and nor is the advocate's role to fight against it. I think we're seeing levels of inequality that is back to the scale of the 1920s. And if you compare today's world and then what you got coming in and going out versus what you had in the 20s coming in and going out, it's about the same thing, okay? I would argue that without substantial pressure from the public demanding fundamental change, Parliament, federal and provincial, is likely to retain its hostile and secretive qualities no matter which party is in. And I have taken to calling them the libervatives, because there is no difference in a libervative, because they got a bureaucracy that's in place that will twist the message to deny, to suit a liberal, a conservative, or anybody else, because there's no real change when you have that election. And that's a personal view. I do not see any change in the upper management of the regulators that change the rules to meet the political expectations of the party in power. We do not hear any real discussion about what's happening in our cities or even in our neighborhoods, as everyone goes to the corporate agenda, simply because inequality downsides are becoming mainstream and handicap our economy. The government's target, charities, community agencies, or labor unions to lock them out of democratic discussion has to be rectified. There is a list of changes to poverty that everyone knows, but for me, it's affordable housing, food security, and safe neighborhoods that allow people to live in dignity. I have some numbers around London that most people don't know. 47% of Londoners are renters. They are not property owners or taxpayers in the same way, because it's different when you're renting. And yes, they pay, some have subsidies, but not as many as should, because there's over 11,000 people on OW and do not have the dollars. And then for ODSP, I couldn't even get a count because they separate to minimize the problem of OW and ODSP, and they won't give you the global numbers for the City of London. I'm trying to get them, but I haven't got them yet. There's over 3,600 households accessing the food bank. More if you look at the churches and the community food cupboards. There are a number of churches outside of the food bank who actually collect and distribute food in the neighborhoods. So that's going on. 80,000 people with an income below what it costs to live in London are trying to survive. And that's wrong. It is not what I spent a lifetime in the labor movement trying to make change. We had health care. We got Medicare. We were working on getting drug plans and that. I remember in the days when you had PSI, Physician Service Incorporated.
Insurance.
What?
Services
That's the word I can't. I like Susan. She's been backing me up with these things for so long, it's natural. But, I mean, we tried to get the change. Right now, if you try to get hospital services, they call it home care or the LINs or any of them, that's a whole other fight. But I try not to swear in public, but boy, they get me to a point where they are denying by stealth, and you don't know until you need a service or try to get a caregiver to come to your house. My wife went through, and she'll verify that I am not a caregiver, nor am I a cook, but she had both knees and a hip cut. And I acted as caregiver because we couldn't get one. And one of the stupidest rules was they couldn't get the operations done in London, so they sent her to Strathroy and twice to Stratford, Stratford, where the theater is. And then when we come back, we're not eligible for going to home care because we didn't have the operation in London.
Oh, that's a scam.
So it was just one more way to deny a service that was supposed to be yours, okay, when you were needing it, okay? It wasn't that I wasn't going to be there, it wasn't going to be, I mean, I needed somebody who, when they opened a bandage off of a scar tissue, that they knew what they were looking at. I didn't. If it was turning green, I'd have been putting her in the car to go to the hospital, but it wasn't. But it did have a change of color. I finally found a girl that works in a nursing home who lives in the complex where I live, and she came over and she would check on her, and she helped me through those things that I didn't understand. You try to get, I've had people say, I want to get a battery for my hearing aid, or I need hearing aids. I can't get them because they're not covered by anything. And yet, if you listen to the hearing aid people that sell it to you, oh, well, it's a tax deductible, so you can get it back from your taxes. Well, you have to have an income that allows you to pay taxes in order to collect it. So you haven't got it. The same thing with the dentist. Yes, you can go on an 18-month waiting list to get some dental care from the university. Well, let me say that that's not an experience you want to wait for when you got a tooth that's swelled out to here and you're trying to get through a meal or even to consider having a drink, okay, cold or hot. So we have lost democracy in this country, and I can't start the revolution. But if somebody starts it, I'll probably be trying to help them get through the beatings that you'll get when you hit the ramparts, okay? But, and I may be able to even do a little tourniquet on a bleeding thing, but somehow or other, if we don't get back to a democratic country where you have in place a system that recognizes what it means to live in dignity in the community. I'm not asking to move to a 500,000 square foot house that costs over $500,000. I live in 629 feet. My wife can get lost in that unit anytime she wants because I turn around and she ain't where she's supposed to be. So I've got over that, okay? But that's what we live in. I'm very happy about it. I think she is too most of the time because she says she ain't moving no place. So that's our life. I need to feel, and when I go and talk like this, I don't do it as much as I might, but I really am trying to regain the dignity that I think is lost to our community. And I've done some other meetings, and you know I go to the NLC meetings. And I'm careful of other people's ideas and wishes. So I'm not as, I don't do things that are intentionally to get them upset, but somehow you gotta wake them up. And I don't know what the best way to do it is, but I wanna live in dignity until somebody decides I shouldn't be around anymore. And I did find out, and I was telling Anthony this morning, we were doing some computer stuff, and one of the guys had a thing that went on to Wi-Fi, and all of a sudden this thing comes up, somebody in your neighborhood is being monitored by the OPP. And he asked the guy that was on the computer, says, "What'd you do now?" And I says, "I don't know yet. They haven't come to the door." So under this C-51 that you talked about, I think there is room for them to come knocking at my door because I speak out against it. And I think we all should be aware of that. They can come to your door whenever they want, okay? And that's not living in dignity, but I'd be damned if I'll live in fear of the SOBs, because I'll be around long after they've changed and retired, because I've outlived so many bureaucrats now that have retired at City Hall, and I'm still irritating the ones that are replacing them, and it's great fun. And I'll tell you, I invite all of you to join me, because it's the greatest hobby you can have, is irritating the comfortable, and then in the first place you irritate a politician, then you irritate the comfortable. Thank you.
And that leaves us with John Clarke from OCAP.
You're so good.
So, thank you very much for inviting me. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual work that the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty is doing based in Toronto. But before that, I just wanted to make a couple of observations about austerity itself, since we're talking about poverty, inequality, and austerity, and I would presume the fight against those things. The first thing is there's a sort of a well-meaning slogan that goes around that says austerity isn't working. And I think it's sort of necessary to qualify that and make clear that austerity is working for some people. And it's not working for society, and certainly if governments ran society in the interests of most people, it would be a disastrous course that wouldn't be considered. But austerity in terms of enriching the richest people is working extremely well. We're reaching levels of inequality that are unprecedented, and that's true in terms of you can go back as many decades as you want. You can go back to the Second World War and before, and we're dealing with an absolutely incredible situation at the moment. And I would suggest that the austerity agenda that emerged after the crisis in 2008, an agenda of kind of hyper-austerity, has been at root an attempt to solve a crisis within the system itself at the expense of most people. And it's been its impact has been absolutely colossal, and it's clearly a work in progress. The UK Prime Minister David Cameron just some time ago gave a speech rather fittingly at the Lord Mayor's banquet, at which he suggested that austerity was in fact not a temporary cure, but a permanent reorganisation of society. And I think that's something that's very, very true. And so the unfolding of that agenda is something that's having a profound implication. In this province, because the point I think I want to drive home is that the whole idea of austerity is to create out there in society a sort of a climate of desperation that furthers the enrichment of the richest people by making the general population infinitely more exploitable than they were before. In 2003, which was of course the year that the Liberals took power in this province, 4.3% of the working population worked for the minimum wage. Within 8 years, that had been doubled to 9% working for the minimum wage, with many more working just above the minimum wage. Now, that transfer of wealth and that incredible intensification of exploitation and that growth of the low-wage sector would not have been possible without a really frontal assault on social programs, and in particular income support programs, without the devastation of so-called employment insurance, without the driving down of the adequacy of social assistance. Social assistance rates are probably now at least 55% below their real level that they were when Mike Harris cut them. And without doing that, it would not have been possible to force people into the lowest paying jobs on offer. It would not have been possible to swell the ranks of the people working for the lowest possible wages. So as this work in progress of austerity develops, what I think they're trying to do is to redefine it and intensify it as they go. And that has for us incredible implications, because what we arrive at now, when you look at the proliferation of homelessness, when you look at the fact that they are targeting disabled people and injured workers in ways that they haven't done before, in much more extreme ways, is that the agenda has gone from merely trying to reduce entitlement to they're actually flirting with the concept of outright social abandonment, of actually going back to a situation where there aren't provision for people's basic needs, where people don't survive. In the UK, the work capability assessment that they put in place for people requiring sick and disability benefits has created death on an enormous scale. It's been discovered through using Department of Work and Pensions own figures that 10,000 people a year in the UK have been dying within 6 weeks of being assessed fit to work by the work assessment system. And so that is the kind of the model that's creeping in. That's what's behind the reviews for people on ODSP. That's what's behind the deeming process that takes place within WSIB, an actual abandoning of people. So that's, I think, the sort of the situation that we're in. And I then want to talk just a little bit about some of the ways in which we've been trying to fight back, and then draw some sort of like general conclusions. So we're based in Toronto, where there is, as everyone will be aware, an incredible crisis of homelessness. The numbers of people that are on the streets in Toronto has grown enormously. You have the emergency shelter system providing now over 4,000 spaces per night for people, and behind that are tens of thousands of people making whatever desperate temporary arrangements they can to avoid becoming homeless and sleeping on people's couches. You have 170,000 people on the waiting list for affordable housing in the city. I mean, an absolutely incredible situation. So, but at the same time, it's clear they don't even want to provide emergency shelter space. The municipal level of government in Toronto has done everything it can to sabotage. We're not talking about housing here, we're talking about warehouses for human beings, we're talking about emergency shelters. And they've done everything they can to sabotage trying to provide basic shelter. And I think their calculation is very simply, they don't want Toronto to be perceived as a good place to come to try to survive. They actually wanted to create a situation where the provision for people's needs is so sparse that homeless people don't try and survive on the streets of Toronto. That's I think, the calculation. So we've resisted that. We've resisted that to the very, very best of our ability. And it's centered around the fact that the city passed a policy saying that shelters should not operate at more than 90% occupancy levels, which basically means you provide shelters with enough room within the system that people can find space, and you provide shelters that are not so grossly overcrowded that people are driven out of them by violence and the impossibility of surviving in that situation. And what has actually happened is they've adopted the policy but not enforced it. so that you have this situation where many of the downtown shelters operate at 100% or more capacity. Seton House, the main men's hostel on George Street in the downtown east, you have situations where they put down cots in the TV lounge for people to sleep on because they haven't got room in the main facility. So that kind of situation of overcrowding with street deaths occurring on a growing scale is something that we've been taking up a struggle against. And back two winters ago, when Rob Ford was still the mayor, we took up a struggle to try to win some more shelter space. And it involved some really quite sharp struggles. Lots of different things happened, but we did two major occupations. We took over the area in front of Ford's office at City Hall and held that for a day until they came in and made a whole bunch of arrests and whatnot. And then we did the same thing at Metro Hall. And it was quite remarkable. There was a lot of solidarity, a lot of support. It did end with us actually being removed, but for some reason, some polling firm actually did one of the mainstream ones, I forget which it was, but they actually did a survey, a public opinion survey. It was sort of interesting because what it showed was that 70% of people registered the fact that they agreed with us and not with Rob Ford. And when people were asked the question, is it permissible to organise an illegal occupation of City Hall, we found that 48% to 48% people were balanced. And if you took people earning less than $30,000 a year, then we had overwhelming support on our side. So it was interesting to see that there was really significant support. That led to a situation where Metro Hall was opened as a warming centre. That people were able to go in there to survive on the coldest nights. It led to new women's shelter being open, and it led to an affirmation of the 90% policy. In practice, they sabotaged it, and this last winter, which was of course exceptionally cold, January began with the new mayor, a somewhat slicker operation than we had under Ford. The new mayor came in, and immediately in early January there were 4 deaths on the streets. One man froze to death in a van. Another man burned himself to death in a shack trying to stay warm. Another man came in from the cold under what's called the respite program in the main referral centre and died shortly thereafter. And a fourth man perished as well. So that led to a situation where the shelters were hopelessly full. The winter was very cold. The levels of overcrowding were enormous. The man who died at Young Street and Young and Dundas died in a shelter, a streetcar shelter, at the busiest intersection in the country, froze to death inside that shelter. So when it occurred, we organised immediately a mass delegation to the mayor's office. We were able to get past the security and get a whole bunch of people right into the lobby of the mayor's office, and they were actually meeting to discuss the issue at the time, so that we were sort of a welcome item, or perhaps an unwelcome item on the agenda at that particular moment. But it led to a situation where more space was opened. And what we've, I think, created is a situation where the shelters are still enormously overcrowded, but we have actually shown that it is possible to actually win some things from them by taking community action. That's been really important. But what is now entering into the mix is that unlike Ford, who was of course a rather crude, dysfunctional kind of a figure who would just take the position that if the shelters are at 96% capacity, that means there's 4% leeway and that should be fine, so nobody's got anything to complain about. Tory is somewhat slicker than that. So he's he's gone with the idea, yes, let's put a bit of money into this, let's open a few more bed spaces, let's try. It's a bit embarrassing with the Pan Am Games coming up to have people freezing to death on the streets. We don't really need that. So he's prepared to be a little gentler. But at the same time, what now emerges is that a real plan is crystallising at City Hall to relocate shelter provision to the suburbs. Right? Now that's really devastating, that's a really devastating way to approach it. I mean, you can take any major centre anywhere in the world, and quite obviously, homeless people are going to gravitate in the city centre of the biggest centres. It's because it's where people can survive, it's where services are, and it's where travelling times are relatively small. Distances are relatively small. You can survive. It doesn't matter whether it's London, Paris, Toronto, Calcutta, Buenos Aires. It's always the same. People are going to gather in the middle of the city. What has happened is that they are preparing to try to relocate the shelter spaces out to the burbs, which is going to be a complete disaster. If they think street deaths are a large problem now, you can imagine a situation where people get turned out in a suburban area at 6 o'clock in the morning with the nearest food bank 2 miles away and the nearest drop-in 3 miles away. It's just not a tenable situation. So we're challenging that. We're taking up a fight against that. This last couple of weeks, the Hope Shelter at McCall and College, right by the University of Toronto, closed down because the owner of the property wanted to rent it to somebody else. That's going to be the sort of the driving approach. The main men's shelter of Seton House, with a small shelter next door, houses some 746, I think it is, homeless people. In 2 years' time, they plan to close that down, demolish it, build a series of condominiums there with a shelter space for only 100 people, and then relocate to, we don't know where, maybe the Rouge Valley, the zoo. We're not sure where they plan to put people. But that's what we're confronting. So we're taking up a big campaign on this and a big fight on it. One of the things that we're looking to do, I mean, we think about this strategically. We've always believed that the real way in which the poor can have political influence is through their ability to take disruptive action. I mean, if poor people suffer in silence, they can suffer all they want. Whether it's the hunger marches of the 1930s, the Ottawa Trek, whatever it was, people have always been able to win things by being where they're not supposed to be, by being disruptive, by mobilising in a way that challenges authority. And that's sort of the model that we've got. So we calculate that the developers and the politicians and the people running the tourist industry and the condo builders and whatever else, they consider the homeless in the downtown to be a nuisance. So the obvious strategic objective is to create a major problem. And in doing that, we're looking to actually mobilise homeless people and their allies in ways that drive that home to them. Like, for example, the possibility of taking over the lobby of one of the plush hotels, or taking over one of those kinds of actions. And we'll start to escalate that, and we'll start to take it up. And the demand everywhere will be then open space, provide enough space for people, and the need for such actions will disappear. If you're going to abandon people, they're not going to accept it. It's not going to be. People are not going to go quietly. So that's the fight on homelessness. And I also just briefly wanted to touch on the other area of enormous importance in terms of the struggle that we're facing. And I mentioned the fact that social assistance rates are so profoundly, grossly, hopelessly inadequate. You have a whole population of people who are being provided levels of income that don't enable them to pay rent and eat with any adequacy. And it's clearly a compounding situation. The Minister of Poverty Reduction is based in the city, and this government did put in place a Poverty Reduction Act, under which it's supposed to be the law that governments have to implement poverty reduction plans. But of course, if there were penalties attached to the Poverty Reduction Act that are like the same kind of penalties that the laws that affect poor people have in place, then they'd be having their cabinet meetings in a jail cell somewhere, because they have consistently broken and violated that law. People are getting poorer. And it's not just that social assistance rates are being driven down, but there is this other model that they're pursuing, which is to force disabled people into the scramble for the lowest paying jobs on offer, basing themselves very much on the UK model that I mentioned, and based very much on the kind of stuff that's happening in WSIB. where people are deemed to be capable of performing a certain task that they couldn't possibly perform, and then abandoned and dumped onto the ODSP roles, or just dumped into a despairing, hopeless situation. That's what's going on. So we're challenging that, and we're mobilising against that. We fought the progressive attempt to erode the adequacy of income support systems. And when we do that, we don't think we're doing it just in the interest of the people that are on social assistance alone. We're doing it in the interest of all working people. Because if there is not an income support floor that has some level of adequacy to it, then that makes the driving down of wages and the increasing of the rate of exploitation so much more easier for employers. And so we fought at every point to try and challenge that. And we're fighting now against this process of ODSP medical reviews. What they have done is that they are implementing at an accelerated rate a process of reviewing the claims of people who are on ODSP. And about a third of the population of people on ODSP are going to be affected by this. So what is now happening is that people are getting in the mail, and they have 90 days to respond, these packages that are just like the original application process, and people have to go through it again. Whether they even get the notice, I spoke to one ODSP worker in the Young Street office in Toronto, who told me that she had a pile that thick of clients who their applications were mailed to her because they're homeless and they didn't have mailing addresses, so they'd given the ODSP officers their mailing address, but she had no contact with them. So she had this pile of people who were sitting there waiting for their 90 days to go by, and then they'd just be cut off of ODSP altogether without ever knowing that it was happening. We had a woman call us the other day who had been put onto ODSP on the basis of a diagnosis, a psychiatric diagnosis, that she was bipolar and that she suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. She had been put on ODSP, she'd been on it for 6 years, she received the review, she went for a review, she filed to the best availability and was deemed to be recovered and capable of working and cut off of ODSP. So this massive process, very much based on the WSIB UK model, is being put in place. And we're looking to challenge it. The Raise the Rates campaign that OCAP is part of is a coalition of local community organisations and trade unions. Both QP and OPSU are members of it, and we're looking to mobilise. We have our next week of action actually coming up on May the 18th, where we're going to go. It's constituency week for the MPPs, and we're looking to go to their constituency offices with meetings and delegations if people like something more vigorous. If people feel like it, that's great too, and to do actions in as many places as we can. I just conclude what I was going to say by pointing out that I think that we're living in a situation where, as other speakers have alluded to, there is this mounting austerity agenda that is only going to be tackled by an actual mobilisation within society itself, by an actual challenge that's organised. We're speaking about the poverty aspect of the thing, but it's much broader than that. It affects people's basic services, it affects healthcare, it affects workers' rights, it affects everything. And what I think we have to really work to build, I've said this enough times that it begins to feel like a cliche, but I think it's an apt thing to say, is that I think that we have to build a movement that defends its gains, but at the same time leaves nobody behind. Right? A movement that actually says that it's good that there are workers in this province who have a living wage, and we're going to fight to defend that. But there are also lots of workers who don't have a living wage. There are also poor people who don't have an income that enables them to house themselves. There are people on the streets, and there are injured workers being abandoned. And we're going to build a movement that brings everybody together in a collective act of resistance. And I have great strength and I have great confidence in the strength of such a movement. I believe that it can. It's not. We're not fighting. We are not by any means registering our protest against something we can't stop. We are actually building a movement that can win. On that basis, thanks very much. And if there's any questions,
A number of years ago, I had worked in the construction industry, and every single winter you got laid off. And if you did work, you suffered because the conditions were using help. But in any case, I went to get my workman's unemployment insurance benefits, and they told me that I would be disallowed for 6 months of it because I had broken some rule. And I had no idea what they were talking about, so I asked them to explain, and they sent me to one of those meetings where you sit in a room with people and they explain all the rules, and you come out knowing less than you did when you went in. Anyways, so I went back to the person who was in charge of my case file and said, you know, they said these things and I don't understand it. Can you explain it to me better? And she said, gave me the explanation. At the end of it, I said, well, how does that fix anything? How does that make it so that I get paid, you know? And she then explained that to me, and I said, I still don't understand you. Can you write it down? So she wrote it down, and at the end of it, I said, so if I have more questions, how do I get a hold of you? So she wrote her name and her phone number. So at some point, a few weeks later, when I didn't receive any checks, I went and complained to, at that time it was some kind of an ombudsman that was in charge of those sorts of things, and I complained to him about it, and he set up a meeting between myself and the manager of the London office. And he said to the manager of the London office, this man has given me this sheet of paper that explains what's supposed to happen. Did this come from your office? And the manager looks at it and says, well, yes, that's so-and-so from our office here. He says, then it's settled, it's done, pay the man. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the discussion that I had with my, I'm not sure you call her a counselor or whatever, she was not trying to look like she was cutting me off. She was trying to look like she was helping me. So when she worded the explanation, the wording in the explanation was the way I would like to hear it, or the way it actually should be. But she was still trying to say that I wasn't getting money, but it ended up coming out that I was getting money by the way that she said it. So I think that you know, when I do come in contact with people who are working for these agencies, WSIB, unemployment insurance, they all seem to think they from their perspective are trying to help you. And if you can get them to say what it is they're thinking about, how they're trying to help you, they may actually undo what the laws or, you know, are attempting to do, the austerity measures they're trying to do.
Do you want to take a few people? I don't know how you want to do it.
This is all good. Steve?
So, one of the, I think, frustrations or challenges that a lot of us feel is that, John, you were mentioning a sort of opinion survey that showed that people had a lot of support and solidarity with some of the resistance. But at the same time, you know, what's often missing is this sense that people who feel that way feel like there's a viable, you know, movement for them to join or a way for them to get involved and be effective. A lot of us, maybe for many years or whatever, go to demonstrations and we do it because of our political analysis and values and so on. But in terms of reaching or extending beyond the circle of people who come to a lot of events into the broader society, that type of movement that you were talking about at the end, there sort of needs to be some kind of confidence that they're not just doing it because they're expressing their values or something like that, but that it's actually a viable strategy of making a difference. And sometimes it seems like it's hard to convince people of that. And I was struck when Kevin was talking about how he got excited when there was an Occupy movement. So suddenly there were, you know, hundreds and thousands of people in the streets protesting. There was a sense that you're joining a movement, you're participating in something that can really exercise some social power and push back against the power of the rich and so on. But when that's not happening, you know, I think what's so frustrating is to figure out ways to get that ball rolling. I mean, the Occupy things seem to happen overnight and sort of spontaneously. But I guess, yeah, I'm not really saying anything. I'm just wondering what your thoughts, John, or other speakers or people at the beginning think about ways that we can create some of that sense of momentum, that sense that there's a movement that people can join to be effective and powerful together collectively. by struggling, as opposed to just some people who do it because of our kind of ideological commitments or something like that, which is going to be a small minority of people, right? And not necessarily, it doesn't have that magnetic power that a movement has, where it draws people in. So I feel like we're stuck in terms of the anti-austerity mobilizations and organizations that are going on right now. We're stuck at this stage where we don't have that momentum, and it's hard to see how we can turn the corner. I don't say that in a pessimistic way, but just in the spirit of, maybe we can grapple with this a little bit.
You want to lead off?
Yeah. With two things. First of all, around what you might term frontline workers within the systems of whether it's WSIB or EI or social systems. I mean, I think the systems are oppressive. There's no question about that. But I also think that there is the possibility of building real alliances with workers within those systems. And in the raise the rates stuff, we've tried to do that to the best of our abilities. And that's not to say that every person who works in an ODSP or a Ontario Works office is necessarily the finest example of working class solidarity. We do have our problems to wrestle with, but fundamentally, I mean, I think we have to make a distinction between the systems that are designed to punish and deny people, and the possibilities of pushing back within those regimes. To give you an example, we had two different Ontario Works offices within the City of Toronto I can think of. When we were trying to access a program called the Special Diet and get people money by having medical providers fill in forms and get money to people, I think of two different offices. I won't name them, but at one of these offices, it was a very ugly and somewhat racist climate that existed within the office, and the level there was very low. The workers within there were behaving really quite badly, and people were getting really messed around. In another office, there was a shop steward and a group of union activists who took an entirely different view. And they went to their manager and they said, "We're not doctors. We don't make these determinations. If a doctor prescribes that somebody needs the special diet, we put it through. You're the manager. If you want to deny it, that's up to you. We don't do that because we don't second guess medical opinions in this office, and we're not prepared to." And it had an enormous difference in terms of the regimes that existed in the two offices. Right? So I'm saying there are real possibilities. On the second point, sort of like critical mass, you might say, right? And the fact that you've got, we're not living in a time of mass mobilisation against austerity at this point, at least not here. I've got this conversation I had with this woman in St. Catharines, who I can never get away from when people ask this question, because it always sort of brings it back to me. I go to a meeting in St. Catharines, it's around poverty issues, and there's a woman sitting there who tells me she's on ODSP, and we're talking back and forth, and all of a sudden she says something just out of the blue that sort of like brought home to me something that people think. And she said, I really think, I've come to this meeting, I really think it's great what you're saying, and I think it's so good that people are doing this, but on the other hand, let's be honest, governments are going to do what they're going to do, and there's nothing we can really do to stop it, is there? Which, I mean, I couldn't disagree more with the woman, but I think you have to give a 10 out of 10 for honesty and for saying something that's really important. Because I think that is the attitude that is pervasive out there. That is the attitude that people have. People don't have in their lives anything that really points them to the notion that organising and collective action and building movements is going to make any difference, because it's just not within their frame of reference. And that's why when things do pop up like Occupy, is you start to see that break down, because people do see that, see that something can happen. So, but on the other hand, I think, we live at a time when that can change very, very rapidly. And it's going to involve, I mean, there are people, and you sort of alluded to this, there are people who, I mean, they get involved for a good part of their lives, if not most of their lives, in activism of one kind or another. There's some of us like that in this room who we just feel a level of commitment to struggle and political issues that's exceptionally high for whatever reason. Right? But most people are not like that. I mean, this being the city where the Tolpuddle martyrs are buried, right? It's worth remembering that Tolpuddle martyrs, when they got back from Australia, the reason they came here was because they didn't want to be activists. They just wanted to go back to being working people again. They didn't want all the fuss and the excitement and notoriety and infamy. So they moved to Upper Canada to get away from the 19th century equivalent of the spotlight. And that's why they came here. And that's really what most people are like. It's only at exceptional times that things change. It may happen once or twice in their lives. There may be a strike. Maybe they're going to close a hospital, or something happens at their kid's school, or something gets them involved temporarily in struggle. And then there are times when it just generally things are happening in society that are so fundamentally dreadful in people's lives that they mobilise and huge movements spring up. They generally spring up very, very quickly. But behind them is the fact that there's been this patient organising work going on for years and decades. And I mean, okay, so I'm thrilled to come down here today, but this is not a mass assembly, obviously. But what's happening here, if people were ready for a mass assembly, it's extremely important that the kind of people gathered here have played the role they've played, because people need to be given some kind of lead in that situation. And so, I mean, you know, it's impossible to make predictions, but I think this is a period that we're in when things can spring up with enormous speed, and you know, the woman in St. Catherine's be the leader of the movement. You know, that's I think the way it is.
My wife reads French, so she has access to French news, and she's reporting what very few of us know here in Ontario, that there are huge demonstrations against austerity taking place in Montreal and elsewhere in Quebec. 80,000 people, week before yesterday, in the streets. Is there any connection or attempt to make any connection between the work that you're doing and what they're doing?
Well, yeah, I was actually just meeting with some people yesterday. I mean, we are. I mean, we're talking, we're learning as much as we can, and there's certainly people going down there, and it's happening. But the movement that's emerged there is, I mean, I don't think there's an immediate possibility of people in Ontario just simply saying, look what's happening in Quebec, let's do the same. You know, so there are problems to be overcome, but I think, I mean, generally, I mean, in the life of this country, the role of Quebec and the struggles that have happened in Quebec and how much of a lead Quebec has given and how much there is to learn from Quebec is a massively underutilised resource. That's really the truth. What happened in the early 70s in Quebec, it was unprecedented in North America. How many people even know about it?
Yeah, I'd just echo what John said. I mean, it's that unglamorous work of setting up things like this on a regular basis that don't look very fruitful, but I think that that the mood, the like appetite for revolutionary type stuff or whatever degree of radical activity just sort of swells and comes and goes at different periods, and you can't really see it coming. I know almost none of the veteran radicals I knew thought Occupy was going to amount to anything when it came up. I certainly didn't. And now I'd say, you know, it's the biggest thing that hit us in quite a while. And Quebec, I mean, that's what we're looking at. I think if we're seeing this as a real struggle, there's not a better example for us right there, you know? And there are people working on trying to stretch it into Anglo-Canada. It's a tough fight. But there's things like, I know John's involved with the Common Front Assembly coming up and the New One Smart Change is doing an effort, and there's people working with students all over the place in different ways. I mean, even here at Quiet Western, there's been quite a ruckus lately. So, I mean, there are reasons for optimism, and this stuff comes and goes, and it's out of our hands to a large extent. We can only do those sort of things that don't get a lot of attention and try and build what we can so that when the wave does come along, we have something to take advantage of. I mean, I don't know any other way to do it. There's no formula that I know of.
What's the ruckus at Western you're talking about?
Well, mainly around Chakma and his
Double dip.
minimum wage salary. And I mean, I don't know, I've done things at Western a lot, and it's usually a pretty quiet territory, you know, kind of a dead zone, you know. There's usually a handful of us for anything that's you know, causing a scene at all. But there was probably about 100 people at least the other day, and you know, really angry and really letting them know. And I was really encouraged to see that. So.
And then they're over-exploited part-time faculty members and graduate students have been on strike for quite a while.
Mm-hmm.
And the president got double salary.
I was really encouraged at the rally for the Bill C-51. How many people do you think were there that day?
I heard 350-ish.
Yeah.
At least 300-400.
Yeah.
Because I think that may be something that will, I saw people there I've never seen before, saw people that used to be involved in things, you know, that had come out.
We do have one
People
next week.
phoned me and said, do you want to go? Somebody I thought that would never want to go to anything, so that was quite encouraging. So, and I mean, it is something, you know, if people are paying attention and reading anything about it, it can affect so many people and all of us, you know, and possibly. So I think that really will bring a lot of people together.
Well, that's what people need to realize. I was saying about them phoning me about my comment that I made, which was a joke about the hunger strike. But they let me know that everybody that's friends of mine is now, that's part of that conversation. The police are watching it, right? Like, you know, there's no privacy anymore, even though I had it set. So we're all, I've met most of you guys at different rallies and stuff where we push the envelope. So for sure, just because they're not phoning us, they're probably doing this to all of us. And C-51 is gonna make it so much worse, for sure.
We're always looking, I guess maybe it's because, well, maybe, but we're always talking about trying to get the government to make the changes that people need for their support, but we never really talk about other alternatives that people can do themselves and not worry about the government. I think that there's a whole area of discussion that needs to take place. If you're not getting taken care of by the government, what else can you do so you do get taken care of? How can people get together and build groups that can house people, feed people, take care of people without trying to necessarily force the government? Because if the government and the employers aren't interested in doing it, then why the hell are we trying to get them to do it if there are other possibilities, such as being direct and taking care of people individually? I think this is something we never ever discuss, and I think it's a whole area that if you started to do serious work towards taking care of each other, then you get their attention, because that's the one thing they don't want to have happen, I believe, is for a government or for people to say, fuck you, we don't care what you do.
Yeah.
But we never talk about that. We never try to organize around those types of things. It's easier to go and stand around and protest than it is to come up with other ways of taking care of it. And I think we should look into that.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of jump on top
I've
of
gotten
that.
a warning if this cuts out. That's because my battery has died, so I apologize, guys.
A while. I worked with Homes First, I worked with community housing, St. Christopher House. And before we opened Street City, we did some research of what they were doing in the States. They don't have the same nonprofit model as we do. And organizations could own the building. Here, you're not allowed to own the building. So that means you're never really allowed to control your budget. And that's a huge ace in their pocket because it means you're always going by their budget. What they want to see, what they want to authorize, and what they don't. And they'll tell you what that is. So you're always under their thumb. So as long as we act like dependents within a welfare state system and ask, please daddy, can I have some more? Can I have just a little bit more? Guess what? They get to call the shots. And that's what they did with us. So I think we really need to understand how we can make alternative models. For example, a for-profit housing model where you have a lower level of intake where people don't have to pay for housing and they work within that model to a rent-paying situation. We never did that at Homes First. But that is really the model that we should have worked toward, so that the people who are paying for their housing are literally subsidizing the people who cannot pay for their housing, and it's a balanced profit kind of model. So not non-profit, because that means the government controls you. Not for-profit, but a balanced profit model where it sustains itself. We're not talking about sustainable profitability. We're not talking about anything like that. But I think as long as we're out in the streets asking daddy for a couple cents more, they're going to control the shots.
I like the idea that we need to consider other ways of doing things and be sustainable for ourselves. I think the old mutual aid societies that labor used to support before they came out with many of these measures to help people is something we should sort of reinvestigate. But I think there is value in demanding that the state live up to its own obligations. I think part of what drives the moods of things like Occupy is that discrepancy between what we're supposed to be able to have and not being able to get it. Like, especially in Europe, a lot of the people on the streets were like young people with degrees living in their parents' basement. You know, and I think we're starting to experience that here, where there's just a disconnect between the promise and the reality. And that when we go out and force the situation, when we confront the state with that, it becomes more obvious to the people and adds pressure on the state. We can make small gains, and I think that's part of what draws people in, is that being able to fight and have something you say you won, you know? And that there hasn't been a whole lot of that lately, and that's part of what's missing, you know, from the left. So
Yeah,
just another side of it, I think.
Even when we win that much.
Sure.
And we need that.
It's ultimately not the answer,
Yeah.
but I think the fight is worth it for different reasons. Like, it's part of what draws people in, gets them into fighting, because we can't just jump into the revolution, I don't think, you know, just from 0 to 60. People gotta come in, it's kind of like fighting, you know, you gotta get a couple fights under your belt before you're gonna be confident. You know, we're not Montreal here, you know, and why are they Montreal? You know, because they engage in this sort of thing on a regular basis and have built up that culture. I think that's one part of it, and that's part of what we're trying to do, is just build up this sense of we have a right to that and we demand it. So I don't see it as much as begging. I know a lot of people are against the whole confronting the state thing, see it that way, but to me it's more like demanding. Like, this is our deal, supposed to be our deal, and we want you to fulfill it. And if you're not, then it becomes obvious to everyone around us that you're not.